It is unimaginably upsetting for these families. They are so frustrated by it. They are curtailed by the restrictive orders in place, meaning they can't come and speak openly on TV in response like you'd want them to. They can't say, this is devastating for us. Your continued questioning of the evidence presented is unhelpful and is skewing a narrative that has been firmly established by the jury and the Court of Appeal. So it's very difficult for them to have a voice in this. And I think people forget perhaps that whilst they're questioning her conviction, there are innocent victims at the heart of this.
An inquiry into the deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital neonatal unit begins today. The remit is clear: what needs to be done to stop someone like Lucy Letby killing babies in future. But things have got much muddier in recent weeks, with some doctors, experts and journalists questioning whether Letby is guilty at all. This must be incredibly hard, a very hard time for the parents of the babies who died, of course. Let's speak to Tamlin Bolton, solicitor at Switalski's Solicitors. She represents the families of 6 of the victims. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, let's talk about the inquiry. What do you hope comes from it?
Well, I think the hope really comes from the families, doesn't it? So they want to see an awful lot more transparency about the events that happened on the neonatal unit, not just in reference to their children, but more so in reference to what the consultants were trying to say to their senior managers, the dynamic and the culture on the unit, how parents were being treated with their children, and how information was being passed to those parents. Because for a lot of these families, they didn't know things like that their children had collapsed. They didn't know there was this increasing death rate on the unit. They weren't aware of any of those things, and certainly not of any of the suspicions of the consultants until they were contacted by the police in 2018. And these are events that occurred in 2015 and 2016. So the families are looking for an awful lot more transparency and accountability in reference to what was happening on the unit at that time. The inquiry is a very different process from the criminal proceedings, and it's really important that people remember that. It is looking at slightly different events, and it's looking at aspects of patient safety culture that are not only relevant to what Lucy Letby did and what happened to these families, but also to everybody as a patient who accesses the NHS in general.
So they've had this unimaginable thing happen to them. They've had to sit through a trial. Now they're going to go through an inquiry. And obviously they want certain things to come from that. And in the background, there's this kind of low, or perhaps not so low, hum of some experts saying that they're concerned about the safety of Lucy Letby's conviction. That's a lot to deal with.
It is unimaginably upsetting for these families. They are so frustrated by it. They are curtailed by the restrictive orders in place, meaning they can't come and speak openly on TV in response like you'd want them to. They can't say, this is devastating for us. Your continued questioning of the evidence presented is unhelpful and is skewing a narrative that has been firmly established by the jury and the Court of Appeal. So it's very difficult for them to have a voice in this. And I think people forget perhaps that whilst they're questioning her conviction, there are innocent victims at the heart of this. And there has to be a little bit of concern given to the impact that will have on them.
There does indeed. And the opposite point, I suppose, is that if there is Lucy Letby has been convicted of murder, but if there is any doubt over that, is that something that we have to be open to as well? I mean, you'll know yourself as a lawyer that the Royal Statistical Society wrote to the chair of this inquiry to warn generally that it's far from straightforward to draw conclusions from suspicious clusters of deaths in a hospital setting.
I'm not sure that my role or my I'm not here to debate that really. I'm the lawyer for the families in relation to any civil proceedings and representing them at the inquiry. The inquiry looks at very different things. That's certainly not to say I don't believe in open justice and access to justice, and that justice be done sensibly and appropriately. But what there is the benefit of for the jury, for the families, for the Court of Appeal is the full remit of evidence. And I think it's very dangerous to start questioning evidence so openly and in such slightly aggressive way when you haven't seen the full evidence. I think that the inquiry will assist people with understanding the events on that unit. And though I suspect it won't quiet all the voices out there, I do think it will bring some clarity to actually what was happening.
Well, that's interesting. So you think actually this inquiry might lessen some of this background noise?
Well, we're yet to hear what the witnesses will say, aren't we? But I do think it will paint a very clearer picture of the events on that unit.
Just one other thing. You've said that your clients feel there are still gaps in their understanding of what happened. What does that mean exactly?
Well, after the criminal trial concluded, the consultants were far freer and more openly able to talk about their attempts to escalate their concerns with their senior management. But you don't really get to understand the full story and the full picture until you hear from all of the staff involved in those events and until you see the thousands of pages of documents that have been produced for this inquiry to look at internal emails and internal communications as to what was being said by who and the steps the trust were taking to look at events on that unit, or the steps the trust should have been taking to look at an increased death rate on the unit.
Mm. And finally, and I understand there are several lawyers involved here, but the people, the families that you are representing, what is their understanding of whether there might be a new appeal from Lucy Letby's new legal team? Is that a possibility?
Well, my understanding from the reporting is that she has instructed new counsel to appeal to the criminal review panel, but I'm not sure what her plan is for her further appeal.
Okay, Tamlin, thank you for talking to us. Tamlin Bolton, solicitor at Switalskis Solicitors. She represents the families of 6 of the victims of Lucy Letby.